Hey guys, welcome back to the Birds Party channel. Today I'm going to share with you some easy DIY ideas for crafting some pumpkins for your decorations this fall. And basically I'm using really inexpensive pumpkins, like similar ones that you can find at the dollar store or the Dollar Tree, or even recycled pumpkins that you may already have at home, and use them in a new way with a neutral look to decorate this season. I'm really loving each and every one of these projects, and I hope you enjoy them too. And our first DIY project are these really beautiful yarn pumpkins. These are all the rage, they're all over Pinterest, and I actually had a go at creating my own yarn pumpkins quite a few different ways, and the way that I'm showing you here is the best way that I found to make them look super realistic, you know, with that kind of pumpkin shape. And you can use polystyrene pumpkins, or you can use paper mache pumpkins like I'm using here. I'm actually recycling this paper mache pumpkin, and I'll put a link down in the description box to the video where I've used these last year to cover them with velvet. So you can recycle pumpkin shapes that you may already have at home, but like I said, if you find at the Dollar Tree, Dollar Store, or anywhere else, craft store, polystyrene pumpkins, you can use the same technique. And basically you're going to make a hole on the top and bottom of your pumpkins, obviously being very careful using a craft knife or an X-Acto knife to make the hole. My hole was quite large. Like I said, this is a recycled pumpkin shape that I already had at home, but this is quite good to use a really thick yarn. As you can see here, these jumbo, you know, thick yarns. And I'm sorry about the camera that kept moving a little bit, so it was at times a little bit difficult to see, but you get the idea. Basically you're going to take your yarn, you don't even need to glue it, but if you can add a little bit of hot glue to an end and just wrap the yarn around, going through the holes. And if your hole is really big like mine was, at the end, if you're left with a massive hole, you can just stuff it with some tissue paper or some newspaper and just cover it with a little bit more yarn like I've done here, so that you can place your stem on top. Obviously if you have a smaller pumpkin, and I actually did two size pumpkins, you won't have that problem with the smaller pumpkin because the hole will be smaller, so you can easily fit a stem on top. And at the end, if it gets a little bit tricky with a smaller size pumpkin, what you can do, you can use a paper clip, a safety pin, or a little bit of, you know, wire to kind of hook your yarn to the end of the wire to make it easier to pull through the hole like I'm doing here. And this is really easy and gives you a really nice shape for the pumpkin. If you just wrap the yarn around the pumpkin, you get a ball of yarn and it won't look as realistic. So this is the best way that I found for these kind of yarn pumpkins. And for the stem, I got this idea. This is not my own, from a YouTube video. I have no idea who it was. I'll try and find the link and put it in the description box for you guys. But basically we're covering a little bit of a wooden stick with some nautical rope, and I've split the rope into 3 and 4s just to be able to cover this stick with a little bit of hot glue and make it look like a realistic pumpkin stem. And at the end you have something that looks like this. You have a little kind of like a skirting on the bottom that you can turn it up and sit it on top of your pumpkin, and you can trim it to whatever size you like to fit the size of the pumpkin that you're using. This is how you attach it, just with a little bit of hot glue, and you just plonk it into the hole, and it looks so nice, and I think it makes it look really high end. Obviously if you have like a wooden stick that you like, you can use that too, you know, it's no big deal, it's up to you. But I think the combination of the nautical rope with the yarn looks so plush and so high end, like I said. And here's a little look of how I styled it. You can style tier trays with it or create a beautiful centerpiece as well for autumn. Next up, we'll be making a burlap pumpkins, and these are probably one of my favorites as well. And once again, I'll be using the paper mache pumpkin shapes, but this time around I'm just going to leave the top hole that it came with. These had a stem on the top, and like I said, have a look at the DIY tutorial where I covered them with fabric, velvet fabric, and it's basically the same technique. The hole at the top allows you to shove the fabric inside the pumpkin, and once again you can use polystyrene pumpkins here as well, or any other like plastic or any other material, but be sure that if you're using a burlap that you do paint the pumpkin beforehand, because you'll be able to see the surface of the pumpkin. Because I'm using the paper mache one and it's already brown, I didn't need to paint it, but you may need to paint it a color that you like, because you'll be able to see it a little bit. As you can see on the bottom, we can still see the label through the burlap. But the idea basically is to just take a really large enough piece of fabric, it can be velvet, it can be a tea towel, anything else you like, and just place it around the pumpkin and just shove the excess inside as tightly as you can. And if you're left with a hole, once again, the hole was quite large because these are how these paper mache pumpkins came from the craft store to begin with. But if you make a hole, you can make a smaller hole yourself with a craft knife. But here what I decided to do was to cover it with a little bit of more burlap. You can you don't need to do this step, but I decided to do that to make it a little bit neater and give you a different option as well how you can cover these holes. So I just took a piece of cardboard and covered it with a burlap, as you saw. And to finish off my pumpkin, to give it a really nice shape, I decided to kind of highlight the segmented parts of the pumpkin using a bit of a jute twine. And I chose this twine color because, one, I had it at home already, and because I thought it contrasted nicely with the burlap. And obviously if you use a twine that's the same color, you won't be able to see it. So maybe you could use here something that was white as well, or black, or whatever other color you like to contrast with the burlap. And you basically just wrap it around. There's no particular technique that you can do here. But basically at the end you just tie the string, the twine, or you can even use yarn as well to create these segments, and you just trim it off with a pair of scissors, you know, tying a knot at the top. It looks quite unusual, should we say, at the end, but fear not, because I decided to cover that massive hole with a little bit of Spanish moss. And I know you can get this at the Dollar Tree as well if you live in the US, or you can find this sort of moss at a local garden center or anywhere that sells floral equipment as well. And to finish it off, I just add a little twig from my garden with a little bit of hot glue, and voila, you can do these pumpkins any size you like to decorate your table, your shelves, your mantle, you name it. Next up, we'll be making these beautiful DIY lace pumpkins. I love how these pumpkins turned out, and once again I'm using, you guessed it, paper mache pumpkins which I had at home. This one has a little jack-o'-lantern face, but the lace will be covering it. So here, if you don't have lace, or if you don't like the look of the lace pumpkins, you could use a ribbon, but I'd suggest, depending on the size of your pumpkin, if you have a small one like I am using here, not to use a ribbon that's too wide, because it makes it quite difficult to wrap around the pumpkin neatly, because the pumpkin is kind of like an odd shape, you know, it has a lot of grooves and everything. So whether you're using paper mache pumpkin or polystyrene pumpkin, the technique will be the same. You're just going to wrap your ribbon around, and in this case, like I said, I'm using lace for the kind of neutral look and to add a lot of texture as well. And I'm using a paper mache pumpkin, so you can see the pumpkin through the little lace, through the little holes, just about, not a lot. And I found this is super easy and super quick to make as well. Just make sure that you pull the ribbon really tightly, or the lace really tightly, to cover every part of the pumpkin and make it look nice and smooth. If you're using a ribbon that's super wide or too skinny, obviously this will take a lot longer, and you know, but the technique will be exactly the same. And just at the end I just added a little bit of hot glue. Be very careful obviously, because you're dealing with lace, you don't want to burn yourself. And to create that shape, once again I decided to segment my pumpkin so they didn't look like an apple or an orange, you know, or an onion, so that you could see that it was really a pumpkin shape. So this time I used, once again, some string that I had at home that was contrasting with the color of the lace that I was using, and this one turned out much better than I thought. And the lace itself covered the hole that I had on my pumpkin and all the face of the jack-o'-lantern as well. So if you have a bit of an ugly pumpkin, or you're recycling some pumpkin shapes that you already have at home, this is a great technique. And once again, to finish it off, I added, with a little bit of hot glue, a little bit of twig that I found in my garden, and voila, this is one of my favorites as well. Actually, I don't know which one is my favorite, and I kind of grouped it here with some other pumpkins that we'll be making in this video to show you how you can perhaps style it at home. And also I created a little tier tray that you know, kind of to give you some ideas on how you can use these pumpkins. And next up we'll be making this really pretty faux fur little pumpkin, which is also one of my favorites. Let me know down in the comments which one you prefer best, but they're all my favorites, you know, I can't pick one, they're all my babies. Anyway, so for this pumpkin I'm using some faux fur ribbon which I bought last Christmas. So Basically, the idea for this video was to use materials and supplies that I already had at home. You may not have the same supplies and you may have something different, but you know, hopefully you can see some of the techniques that I'm using to cover these pumpkins and you feel inspired to use or recycle or upcycle whatever you already have at home. And because this ribbon was a little bit wider than the lace, I kind of decided to use it and kind of make little segments, if you like, to keep the pumpkin shape, because I think it's really easy to just wrap a pumpkin and it will end up looking like a ball. And the idea is to make it look like, you know, the pumpkin shape. We know it's a faux pumpkin, it's not a real pumpkin, but you want to keep that pumpkin shape, in my opinion, anyway. So I decided to kind of cut little bits of the ribbon, as you can see here, scrunch it top and bottom, and it creates kind of like little segments. I don't know if I'm making myself understood, but hopefully you can see through the video what I'm doing here, and just using a little bit of hot glue top and bottom. And this material is it sheds a little bit, I'm not gonna lie, but it wasn't too bad, so it's not too difficult. I've worked with materials before in the past that shed a lot more, and this one wasn't too bad. And at the end I just kind of took a little bit of hot glue, and where it needed, you know, to be glued in place, I just added a little tiny bit of glue. You don't want to go too crazy with the hot glue and the faux fur, because you end up with a hot mess. Anyway, so in the end you have something like this that is quite shapeless. You know, as you can see, this is why the technique of using these segments helps if you're using a fabric or ribbon that is quite wide to cover a small surface or a shape like a pumpkin. And because it was quite shapeless, like I said, I decided to use my tried and tested technique of segmenting it, and this time I'm using brown yarn, and I think this really made this pumpkin stand out. If I hadn't done that, it would have just been meh, but now it kind of took it to the next level and made it look really high-end, in my opinion. So once again, if you're using a different color, you know, for your faux fur, make sure that the string that you wrap it around or that you segment it with is in a contrasting color. And I think this really kind of the icing on the cake or the string on the pumpkin, whatever. And at the end, once again, I decided to take some little stick from my garden, and you can use anything here. You can go in the woods, you know, foraging with the kids and have some fun collecting little bits and bobs to decorate these pumpkins. And I think it looks so adorable, and you just want to squish it. You can't, but you just want to squish it because it's all fluffy and furry. Anyway, I'm just weird like that. And for last but not least, the little pumpkin that I used for my centerpiece was this little plastic pumpkin. So this one, it was just, you know, super easy. I just took some acrylic pastel colored paint, and this one was a lot yellower in real life than you can see here on camera, and I didn't want any yellow on my decor. Like I said, I wanted to create a neutral look for my centerpiece or for my decor this year, so I decided to paint my pumpkin. So hopefully you feel inspired if you have some ugly pumpkins at home or not quite the right color or whatever, that you can find at thrift stores maybe as well, or really cheaply. I know the Dollar Tree already carries, you know, pumpkins that are, you know, white or neutral color, but if you have these ones at home, which I have a bunch of, then hopefully you can see how you can upcycle them and change your decor year after year. And this is super easy as well, and you can even get the kids involved, you know, if they're at home kind of a bit bored, not knowing what to do, you can get them to paint some pumpkins for you. And I'm using acrylic paint, and I did a couple of coats of this paint. It's up to you. And voila, and I just kind of added all my pumpkins to a tray. The orange pumpkins, I bought them in my local craft store here. I did not make them, but the other ones I made, and here they are in a centerpiece. And I just added some faux greenery to kind of create a little kind of like pumpkin harvest look, you know, that you can add to the center of a table to decorate it. And here is another look of how they can be styled, and hopefully you feel inspired to have a go. If you like this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up. It really helps my channel, lets me know that you like this kind of content. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.